give you a little bit of historical background. So the Jews of Morocco that I'm researching are the Sephardic Jews. And in Morocco, obviously, there were two groups. There were the Megurashim, the Jews who came from Spain and Portugal after the expulsion in 1492, the ones from Portugal a little later, and there was even some earlier migrations after 1391. And the indigenous population living in Morocco were known as the Toshavim, the residents. And they've been there for over 2,000 years. Some say they arrived even after the destruction of the first temple. So nowadays it's quite hard to differentiate between the two groups because of all the generations they did mix together and the traditions mixed and they married and the communities grew to be one. However, at the beginning there certainly was differentiations, and you can even see in Ketubot that at the end of the Ketubah will say whether it's according to the tradition of the exiles of Castile, from Castilla in Spain, or according to the Toshavim, the residents of Morocco. And there's differences also with their minhagim and their customs. For example, on Pesach, most Sephardis will eat kitniot, so grains and rice. But within Morocco, many Jews who are Sephardi won't eat rice, like Europeans, but they'll eat other kitniot. And there's other Moroccans who will. So there's still some differences. If we can carry on. So Morocco is in West Africa, Northwest Africa, and it's surrounded by the Mediterranean and Atlantic. And throughout its history, it had various Muslim dynasties, but there was also controlled by various European powers. So when you start your research, you should really think where your ancestors lived and try to see what European powers had control of those areas, so you can start looking at these archives. So for example, the western coast of Morocco, so around Agadir, Essaouira, Safi, it was very controlled by the Portuguese from the 15th to the 18th century. Northern Morocco was under the British control in the 17th century, then under the Spanish control. And obviously after 1912, it was split into the French and Spanish protectorates, and Tangiers was an international zone. So definitely look into European archives and see what you can find relating to Moroccan Jews at the time. So I'm going to start by giving you a little intro to the various cemeteries in Morocco, which are available online and how you can search them. So for Tangiers, there's two cemeteries. There's the old Jewish cemetery and the new one. Some reports say that the old Jewish cemetery goes back to the 1500s, but I'm not too certain about that because the Jewish community of Tangiers kept on being kicked out and then welcomed back. And the last time they were kicked out was in 1680, when the British left, I believe. And they only came back in 1725 and they established the community, which has been continuous till today. So in the old cemetery, this is a map of it, which was compiled by Philippe Abensur and Sidney Pimienta. I think they researched about 2/3 of the cemetery, and the graves that you can find and can see quite easily are probably from the late 1800s up until the 1940s. There's definitely many more graves from the previous century in the cemetery, but you can't see them anymore, perhaps they're submerged. So what we have here is a list of about 1,200 names. We've got first name, last name, and the number next to them correlates to the map here, where they would be located in the cemetery. So I actually found this map in the Moshe Nahon synagogue in Tangiers, and I photographed it, and you can find these lists on this Facebook group, Generally the Juif Marocain. We'll put a link afterwards. You can view it there, but you can see the full list. And unfortunately, you don't get the death date, but it does help you begin your research. Then for the second cemetery in Tangiers, the new cemetery, it starts operation around the mid-1930s. So there is still some overlap between the old cemetery and the new one. And it's got about over 3,500 graves, and they're all searchable online. So I'm going to see if I can take you to the website to show you how to do this. Yeah, that seems to be working. So this is the website is in French, and this is the homepage. So you've got two options. You can either just command search and look for a name and hope it comes up, or you can search at the top here by name or maiden name. So if we just take an example from here, we've got Sol Levi Abekassis. So, and we've got two extra names, which are her parents' names. So if you open it up, usually the photos are quite good quality, so you can even read the Hebrew. And we've got Sol Vidua, the Issachar Abekassis. So we know that her maiden name was Levi, and she's the widow of Issachar Abekassis. We've got her death date. And so it's very useful because not only did they take the grave records, they also took the community records to show who are the parents of each person buried there. So it's a really, really great resource. You'll also find a lot of Ashkenazis in this cemetery because during the 30s and the 40s, many Europeans fled Europe and they took refuge in Tangiers, which was the international zone. So definitely have a look here. If we go back, next cemetery we have is the Cemetery of Tetuan. So Tetuan, supposedly the cemetery was established in 1492, directly when the Jews arrived from Spain, but the community was only really established around 1530 under Rabbi Chaim Bibas. This is one of the biggest Jewish cemeteries in Morocco and is estimated as probably over 35,000 graves. Only a really, really tiny part of it is available online, so it's about 1,200 graves, probably between the years 1910 and 1960. So again, it's a good place to start, but it is quite disappointing that we don't have a full inventory. The issue with this cemetery is that many graves have no names on them. The very, very old ones certainly have no names on them, and that kind of starts changing around the 1800s. Some of them just have designs. So here, for example, in this picture, the second grave from the left has no markings on it, but tradition tells us that it's a grave of Rabbi Yitzchak ben Walid, and his sons are buried next to him. And you can see there's black over here because people still go to his grave and light candles every year. And this was very typical in Morocco, that you would not put a name on a grave, but if you would put a name on the grave, usually the letters would be bulging out in the stone. So over time, the elements would take the name away, and it would be up to family tradition to remember where the grave is. So if we go to this website, let's have a look at it. Yeah, so it asks you for a login, but you don't actually need a login. You can go straight to Búsqueda, because it's in Spanish. And you can search in this box up here. You can click the first letter of the last name, but here on the front page, we can already see Estrella Abekassis. Her maiden name was Ben Zaken, and we've got her date of death, and there's a photo. Sometimes the photos are not great quality, but here we can pretty much read the Hebrew as well as the Spanish. So you can search here. On this website, we also have another section called Documentos, with a few different documents concerning the communities. And one important one we have is the Libro de Metim. So it's a register of the dead between 1897 and 1971. So you can access it and download it, and I'll show you over here a picture of what it looks like. So we have the Jewish year, the Jewish month, the day of the month, and then it's written in a type of Moroccan soletreo, and it's also kind of written in Haketia. So sometimes the words will be Hebrew, or sometimes they'll be Spanish. So here we have Eshet Misut Pimienta, the wife of Misut Pimienta. So very often women don't have names, but rather it says mother of, sister of, wife of. So it's an amazing resource, but obviously if you can't read Hebrew, and especially this type of Hebrew, then we have a little way around that. If you go to academia, somebody already transcribed most of it as best as they could. There is some mistakes, but on the whole, it's pretty useful. You can download the document and then search within it. So at the beginning, they give a little explanation that, for example, you would have, it says madre, so mother of, or hijo, hija, and right away, if you scroll down, it starts, and we can see the various people named. There is some spelling mistakes or words they couldn't figure out, but on the whole, it's very useful. And if you are searching for family names in this document, try various spellings in Hebrew. In Morocco, they used to love adding alefs after every letter, virtually for no reason, where in modern Hebrew, we don't do that. So try a few different ways to spell your family names and see what you can come up with. For Tetuan, we also have some other information. We also have this Mohel Book by Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Vidal Asservati. So his Mohel Book was written between 1881 to 1940. This should be majority of the males in the community at this time, but it won't be everybody, because this was not a community record, this was his private record. As Mohel, this was a profession. They would travel around and they would get paid for this. But this book you can find in libraries, and the way it's set out is that you've got the name on the left of the child that's been born, the date of his circumcision, and on the right side you've got his father's name, and over here on this column where you should have the mother's name, you actually have daughter of so-and-so. So you don't get the mother's first name, but you do get the maternal grandfather. Again, it's a shame that we don't, have the names for many of the women within these Jewish communities, but at least we get part of it. What else do we have for Tetuan? So that's all for Tetuan at the moment. The next cemetery I want to speak about is the Casablanca Cemetery. There's 2 cemeteries in Casablanca, and apparently there was a third one, the original one, which was probably from 1850 or 1860 when they established the Jewish community there. Most of the founders were from Rabbat. So the families you find in Rabbat, you will definitely find them in Casablanca. But this is the old surviving cemetery, probably from the 1880s up until 1940s. It's situated in the old Mela, but unfortunately it's not available online at all. Some of the graves are very old and falling apart, but there is absolutely thousands of graves. So if you ever get the opportunity to visit, there's a lot of research that can be done there, and hopefully one day we can see it online. But we do have at least something for Casablanca, which is the new cemetery. So there was overlap again between both of them, and this one started around the 1940s, and there's over 11,000 graves, and they're all searchable online. So it's a huge resource. And even if you don't think your family was ever in Casablanca, I would suggest that you search here, because people from all over Morocco were in Casablanca at some point or another. So here again, if they have the maiden name, you'll find it. Other times not. If they've got the date, the year of birth, you'll find it. For example, you see age 74 for Isaac Di Abu, and you can see the image. Sometimes they're quite good. Other times the image is not good enough to read. For example, on this one, you can see that it's really had it. But again, definitely search this website. Moving on, we've got the cemeteries of Rabbat and Saleh. Nowadays, Rabbat and Saleh are one city essentially, but they used to be separate. The old cemetery in Saleh is partly searchable on Jewish Gen. On Jewish Gen, you can also partly search the cemeteries of Fez, Meknes, and Essaouira. So, but most of the ones that are on Jewish Gen are graves which had French or Spanish writing. If the grave only had Hebrew writing, you might find a few of them there, but not many. And it won't list the date of death, only the name. But for example, here we had David Oziel, and we managed to find his grave in Rabbat because we had the area. And from reading his grave, we found the name of his father, which was Jacob Oziel. And actually buried next to him, we found his sister, his father, his brothers. So it was quite great. And what you notice in a lot of these Moroccan cemeteries is that the sections are not by year, it's more by family. So if you find maybe a modern grave from the 50s of a certain family, look around and you'll probably find older graves, maybe the parents or the grandparents very, very close to them. And this specific Rabbi David Oziel is quite an interesting character because he was one of the rabbis in the Melach, and he was known as Sheikh Dawood. There's still a synagogue named after him there, and a street in the Melach. And this cemetery probably goes back to the 1700s. The oldest known burial there is of Rabbi Eliezer ben Samuel de Avila. Again, his grave doesn't have any markings, but it's known by tradition that it's his. And then in Rabbat, we've got another cemetery, the newer, more modern one, probably also from the 1950s up to modern times. There isn't many graves there, and it's not searchable online, but luckily somebody visited there a few years ago and took a number of pictures. It's not all the graves, but some of the pictures that he took are quite clear, and you can read the text. I've had quite a lot of luck when searching for people in Rabbat, so definitely check it out. And if you have a look here, the pictures are very clear, Shalom Amzalig, and the date of death. And even in Hebrew, we have his father's name, Shalom, son of Yehuda. So always try to find the Hebrew on the graves and decipher it, because it will always help you to take an extra generation back. Next cemetery is the Cemetery of Marrakesh. Again, even if you think your family were never in Marrakesh, I tell you, search here because you're likely to find a lot of information. It's actually the cemetery with the largest number of tzaddikim buried there. So there's over 600 tzaddikim buried there. And on the website, when possible, if they had biographical information about the certain rabbis or tzaddikim, they would put it. So for example, this is the grave of Rabbi Chaim Pinto. And on the website, they've listed that he's the son of Rabbi Yaakov, who's the son of Rabbi Yosef, and he was the author of Lekach Tov, who was the son of Rabbi Yaakov Pinto, who was the author of Midrash Melech. So it gives you more biographical information. If your ancestors were rabbis, you can sometimes find copies of their original manuscripts and even find their handwriting or their signatures. So it's very useful. And I'll show you how to use the website. Go over here. Again, there's many graves in this website which have no name, simply white, as you see in these images. But you can search over here and you can open up. The pictures sometimes are not very clear. So for example, this one does have Hebrew, but it's very hard to decipher. I see his name in French is Charles, and in Hebrew his name is Shalom, which is very, very common to have those two names as a translation in Morocco. We do have his year of birth, and usually if there's any comments, biographical comments, they would be down there. Next we have Agadir. I just want to also mention about Marrakesh that it was kind of like the hub community for many of the little communities around it. So Marrakesh and Essaouira are not too far from Agadir and Essaouira are not too far from Marrakesh, and you can likely find people who lived in those towns buried in Marrakesh. So for Agadir, it's quite interesting. We only have a modern Jewish cemetery as far as I know at the moment. And most of the burials are from the 1960s, when there was an earthquake there and about 1,200 Jews died. If you think you had family who were there at the time and might have died, but you can't find them in the cemetery, it's because many of the bodies were not recovered from the rubble. But Agadir is an interesting town in itself, as it was populated mainly by Berber Jews for the past 500 years, who eventually mixed more with the Sephardis, because they're on the western coast. But if we go to the website, it's actually not just for the cemetery, it's a whole website about the modern community of Agadir, and you've got part 1 and part 2. So if you just click on it, you can then search with the paper on the page, or just click on any of the names, and you'll see a number of photos with their death dates. So here we have Mardush Abichatzira, who would be Mordechai Abichatzira. We've got his death date. The majority of them, though, will be from 1960s, you'll notice, unfortunately. The next cemetery we have is Essaouira. So this is also known as Mogador. There's 2 cemeteries there, and unfortunately, the state of the graves are very bad. Mainly the older cemetery, which is on the side of the ocean, because of all the salt water and the erosion in the wind over years. But apparently it goes back to the early 1700s, and the last burial there was in 1875. The new cemetery, which is just across the street, was officially inaugurated in 1892, but it's possible that between the 1875 they were already burying people there. So both cemeteries are searchable online, and there's 2,325 graves. But again, unfortunately, you won't find everybody listed there. I do know actually of somebody who was looking for their grandmother's grave who was not on any of these lists, and he did go and he did manage to find it himself after looking grave by grave. So it is possible to have more research. So if we have a look at the website, search over here, there's some history of the community as well. And there's many Pintos who were rabbis. And we click on this one, Yehuda Pinto. So we don't have the full date of death. It's 1881. And we see over here that he's the son of Chaim Pinto. And here also in the comments, they put that he's a son of Jaime Pinto. So if you have family from anywhere on the Western Coast, so if it's Agadir, Essaouira, Safi, Mazagan, check these cemeteries because they might have been here. This one is for Fez. I think it's fairly new, and unfortunately it doesn't have any pictures and no dates. So it's just a list of names, and it doesn't even have the exact location. It's just the zone that they're in. So I've put here a picture to show you an example of the grave of Solha Tzadeket, Solika Hachwell. She was from Tangiers, and she was a martyr. She died, she was killed in 1834 in Fez for not agreeing to convert and marry the Sultan or a Muslim. I'm not sure about the full story because there's a few different variations. But this is the website, and we can search by name. But what I will tell you is it's not you have to try a variation of spellings. Try the French spelling of your last name, the Spanish spelling. And it seems that on this website, a lot of the spellings are kind of the modern Hebrew spelling. We'll just give it a moment to load. But when we look for Solika's grave, we don't find her as Hachwell. Normally we find her as Hatuel. Yeah, let's have a look now. So if we have a look at Hatuel, this, as far as I know, was never actually, this last name was never spelled like this in Morocco. So I suppose whoever compiled this database might have been Israeli and wrote it like this. So here we have got Solika Hachwell, square number 51, but no more information. So it's great as a starting point, but also try Jewish Gen because you'll have maybe some more information on the Fez Cemetery. And actually there were two cemeteries in Fez. This one was probably from the early 1800s, but they only really started burying their people there on a large scale towards the late 1800s, because the oldest cemetery was on land that eventually was taken by the government or the Sultan, as well as the Mellah, because it was two Mellahs. I'm not sure if it survived or not. So the graves here, unfortunately, are not very old. The next thing we have to research your ancestors is the Allianz Records. So the Allianz schools were started in Morocco in the 1860s. The first one was in Tétouan. And this was kind of the moment that these schools started. This was when girls could also go to school. These schools were in French. So this was kind of the moment of the Jewish emancipation in Morocco, much later than the Jewish emancipation in Europe. So these records we got there in two places. The main archive is in Paris, and you can search the catalog on their website. Some things are indexed, so you might find somebody in your family. But on another website for the Israeli Genealogical Society, what they've done is that they've taken school records. So here's an example. On the left side, we've got the name of the student. So we have David Dahan. We know that he's 10 years old, and I believe his father is Ayosh. On later ones, they will mention both the father and the mother, and sometimes if the child is an orphan or something like that, it will list he's living with his grandfather, so-and-so. So I'll show you how to search this website in a moment, but so far there's records for Fez, Agadir, and Casablanca from about the 1920s up until 1945, because they're not putting anything up after 1945 now because of privacy reasons. But next month there's another 3,500 records coming online for Marrakesh. So this is going to be huge. If we go to the website, it's you have to pay for the website, but you can still search most things for free. So I'll show you. You can search in Hebrew and in English. So if we just search El Malek, for example, you'll get results also from Israel and other countries, but you can limit them to Morocco. So if we have a look down here, we click Morocco, I think it should work. These are just marriages. Okay. Let me try. Okay, for Ben Susan, marriages again. Okay, here we go. So students from 1917 to 1964, Allianz, Morocco. So we have Rafael Ben Susan, son of Solomon. So that you can see even without paying. And this is what you see if you're a paying member. You see the actual image, and if they have the full date of birth, you'll get the full date of birth. I think you'll still see the year at least. And sometimes, for example, with the record for Casablanca and Agadir, you can actually trace 2 generations because it spans about 25 years. So you can find a child, and then you can find when he's married and his children. So it's really great. Now, for the actual Allianz Archives, here's the website. And there's nothing digital online. But what you can do is you can find something in the catalog and then either research it in person or potentially write to them. So if we try Ben Susan again, and we search. And again, I've used Spanish spelling, not the French spelling, but if you try them both, you'll find different things. So we have here, Saul Ben Susan in Fez in 1884. Not sure what this concerns, but there's definitely a wealth of information, not just of students, but about the community in general. So definitely search over here. Next one we have is ketubot. So there is, I believe, over 600 Moroccan ketubot on the Israeli National Library. And there's many ketubot on other university websites from the US or from Germany. So check out the digital collections for various universities and put in keywords like ketubah and Morocco. So this is just an example of a ketubah from Rabbat. And here we have the groom is Ben Zion, son of Meir. And we also even have his grandfather, Makhluf, and he's Ben Arosh. And then the bride is Jimol, and we have her father, Amram, grandfather, David, and great-grandfather, Menachem Ben Zaken. And the witnesses are Rabbi David Sabach and Rabbi Meir Marache. So on this specific ketubah, actually, there's no signature of the groom, but you do see the signatures of the witnesses. So it's a great way, even if you don't find the ketubah that belongs to your family, you might find a family member as a witness on a ketubah, and you can find their signature. So here we also have ketubot on the Yale University, the Branginsky collection, the Israeli Museum. There might be a few doubles, but definitely search them all. And I'll just show you an example. The Israeli National Archive. You can search in English, but I would suggest to search in Hebrew because sometimes the English translation of the name is kind of an Israeli version, which was never actually used. So if you search it in the way you write it, you won't find it. So if you can write in Hebrew, you can just put ketubah Morocco, 2 words. You can get from who can translate, and you'll get all the ketubot. Or you could write ketubah in a specific town. You'll get all the ketubot for that town or a name. Most of them are digitalized, and you can see. Some of them are not actually held by the library, so they've just indexed them, but they're in a different archive. Sometimes because of privacy reasons, they won't appear on the website. But you can go to the specific directly to the real archive and try to see it online. If it's not online at all, you can write to them and they might send you a copy. They just don't want to publicize it. More than that, there's a lot more to find on the Israeli National Archive. I wanted to show you, just a moment. I should have it here. Yes, so this is another section of the Israeli National Archive called Kativ. This is a place where you can find their manuscripts. So, for example, you can just write this. The title is Shtarot Morocco, which means they're kind of not ledgers exactly, but they're different agreements and terms. So it's a collection from various terms from a Bet Din in Fez, Meknez, Rabbat, and it's not online. I've asked them to digitalize it, so it'll be a few weeks. But there's many like this, and you can see, they've given a little index of what it is. So, for example, there's things about inheritance between siblings. So here we've got the split of inheritance between Yishaya, son of Solomon Atubi, and his son Aharon and his daughter Mira. So there you already have 3 generations, and it will say in what town this was. They'll have signatures. You have here Rafael Ben Sur, who was a famous rabbi, the Berdugos. So basically in Morocco, even though we don't have birth, marriage, and death records like we have in Europe, everything went through the Bet Din. And unfortunately, we also don't have all the Bet Din records, but over time, various records are popping up online. And the whole community structure went through the rabbinical courts, whether it was marriage, divorce, inheritance, buying land, disputes. So there's a lot to find here. Next, we have Mohel books. So again, people who perform the circumcisions, it won't necessarily be everybody in a certain community because this was their job. So very often they would travel for this. This specific Mohel book is from Fez, and it's over 2 generations. It's Rabbi Moshe and Samuel Eben Danan, father and son, between 1839 to 1912. Likely there will be majority of the men, I would say, in Fez at the time in this book, but not everybody, because it's possible also that they traveled somewhere else or other people in the community chose a different Mohel to perform it. But again, you can click, you can go onto the Israel National Library and search for it. There's many books actually, Mohel books, but they're not all online for different privacy reasons. And reading it is certainly difficult. As you see the writing, it's not, this one is a bit more simple in comparison to the other ones. And we can see here that it's Moshe, son of Yaakov, the Cohen, son of Hananiah. So again, we've got 3 generations listed. So even if you can't read Hebrew, I'd say at least familiarize yourself with what the family name you're looking for looks like in Hebrew, and then try to familiarize yourself with what it looks like in this Soletreo script. And then scroll through the book. You might find something eventually, and then you'll have to ask somebody for help, but at least it's a starting point. So here, it loads like this, and usually there's a description at the bottom. Some of these books contain many different things, so it will tell you on what page, for example, 56 to 57, it's about family issues, on what page the actual circumcision leisure begins. We also have a few other ones which are available online. So we've got, in 1855, Chaim Romero, who came from the Holy Land. So he traveled around Mogador, Marrakesh, Rabbat, Meknez, Taoudant, and Ifran, performing circumcisions. So this is just kind of a mismatch of different places. Finding your ancestor in this is like a needle in a haystack, but you might as well try. I am working on trying to find a way for these Mohel books to get indexed, but it's probably going to be a very long and difficult process because not many people can read this script. We also have one by Habib Toledano. There's records from Tangiers and Meknez. In the same book, there's also some from Faro and Lisbon, because he was also traveling. Then we've got Essaouira, again, so that's Mogador in the 18th century. And there's many more which are not digitalized. So search Mohel book, search the name of the town, and if you find it on the National Archive and it's not digitalized, ask them to digitalize it. They likely will agree. It might take a few weeks or months, but it's definitely in everybody's benefit. Next is Paris. So it's a Portal de Archivos Españoles. It's an umbrella website for all the different archives in Spain. So it's always good to search it anyways, but specifically if your family came from northern Morocco, so anywhere like Asila, Larache, Tangiers, Tetuan, during the Franco dictatorship and when the Spanish were controlling parts of Spain, they were arresting many Jews on the suspicion or accusing them of either being Freemasons or communists. Whether they were or they weren't, I'm not sure, but this means that every person that was arrested, there was a police file for them. So I can show you how to search. And what's really useful is that in Spain, they go by 2 last names. So again, if we do Ben Susan, search for it. So there's a variety of things, but here we've got Información sobre Salomón Seruya Ben Susan. So we know that he's got, they're showing us 2 last names. So his father's last name is Seruya, his mother is Ben Susan. So that already helps you. And this one is, yeah, either he was a Freemason or communist. They're not digitalized online, but you can write directly to the specific archive. And I believe it costs about 15 euros, and they will digitalize it for you in a few weeks and send it over to you. So it's extremely helpful because you can find out where they lived, what were they accused of, their full date of birth, and the second surname of their mother, which usually is very hard to figure out in Moroccan genealogy. Next resource is the Central Zionist Archive. So it's based in Jerusalem, and they've got a variety of things in their catalog, but mainly the archives of the Jewish Agency. So they have lists of every boat that arrived in Israel with all the immigrants on it from everywhere in the world. So even from Morocco. So this, I believe, is a list from 1956, and it's got the name of the boat, and we have the first name of the person, their surname, the year they were born, and the name of their parents. So this is extremely useful, especially when elderly people move to Israel. We can get the name of the parents who were born in the 1800s. So this is not searchable online at all. You have to search for this at the actual archive, or you can write to them. They're very friendly, easy to approach online or by email. They answer, and they'll search these lists for you for about 250 shekels. And more than that, every immigrant had a file. So usually the immigrants arriving in Israel had their own ID cards or passports from their country, and the Jewish agency took it away from them. So it's very possible that they still survive in their archives, and they will send you copies of this. I'll show you an example in the next slide. So here we have got a Moroccan ID card of Salomon Zerad, and then we have his immigration record in Israel called Solomon Azerad. Both have pictures, dates of birth, and this is something that they might have. Also, very often, teenagers moved to Israel from Morocco without their parents because it was harder for elderly people to get the approval to move, and they wanted young people to build their country, obviously. So when teenagers were sent, they were sent to boarding schools. And very often in the Zionist archives, there'll be files on their kind of psychological state, what their life was back home. So definitely search here. You can also search their website. They've got some things listed on the catalog. So if you just put Morocco in, you might find something, but most of it isn't. So really write to them. This is basically usually where I start my search for Moroccan families, and it's a book by Avraham Yitzhak Laredo, the Names of the Jews of Morocco. He did an amazing job to catalog as many last names as he could, even the most obscure ones from a little village in some mountain where nobody's ever heard of it. And he tries to give you the origin of the name, whether it's Spanish or Arabic, whether it's Berber, whether it might have come from Israel at the destruction of the temple. And usually he'll not only give an explanation, he'll also try to list one or two or more notable people with this name. So for example, here we've got Ferrares, and we've got Jacob de Eliezer Ferrares from Amsterdam, then Samuel Ferrares, who was a member of the community of Larache, and then we've got Elias Ferrares, who was a president of the community in Larache. I've actually researched this family, and they actually are direct descendants of the first Jacob from Amsterdam, but it's very likely that you will find somebody from your family mentioned. And even if you don't, keep note of it, because it kind of helps you understand also which families lived where in Morocco. So you know that the Ferrares were in Larache, they might have been somewhere else as well, but usually it kind of gives you a better sense of where people are from. Then we've got another book which is very similar, by Yosef Toledano. This one is new, it's from 2008. And you might find people here which are not listed in the other one, or vice versa. But it also lists, for example, the Castiel family. They're also from Larache. And we have notable people, so Rabbi Yehuda, Mordechai. And it gives you information of where they lived. So for example, I believe it's Rabbi Yehuda who was in Marrakesh. Mordechai might have been in Meknes very early on. So you can kind of trace the history of the family, how they might have arrived from Spain to Meknes, but then throughout the generations moved to different cities. The next is a book called Malachei Rabbanan by Yosef Ben Naim, and he compiled a list of all the notable rabbis and Kabbalists and Chachamim of Morocco over 500 years. It is in Hebrew, so it's a little difficult, but you can view it online and you can download it and search. So here I've given you an example of the El-Malech, so Yosef El-Malech, another Yosef El-Malech, and if I show you here, it's a website, it's called Hebrew Books, and a lot of Jewish religious books are available here, so you can search for it in advanced search, and then you can download as a PDF the specific document. So again, even if you don't speak Hebrew, you can do that. Once you open it up, if we put our text into Hebrew, we do command search, and we look for El-Malech. It's not working now. Let's look it up. Yeah, here we go. Okay, that one is not searching. It's a bit hard to search these old books sometimes, but let's try another one. Abu Darham. Yeah. So you see Abu Darham, and we're getting about 40 hits. So here it speaks to us about Solomon Abu Darham from Tetuan. Again, he's mentioned, and then Eliyahu Abu Darham. So each time it will mention, you know, what they're notable for, where they were from, not their specific dates, but in what century they they were active, and potentially sometimes the name of their son or the name of their father if they were also rabbis. So you can already kind of reconstruct some trees through this. And even if you don't know if any of your ancestors were rabbis, have a look. You might be surprised. So it's really a good resource. And again, you don't need to necessarily speak Hebrew to search through it. Once you find what you're looking for, you can get some help. What do we have next? So there's this website called Gallica, which has digitalized many books and newspapers, and it's basically you can search directly in it. So here is a newspaper called La Petite Marocaine, which was published in Casablanca between 1925 to 1972. And this is just one example. There's other newspapers available, but this newspaper, many families from Casablanca or even from other places would put an announcement when somebody died, or when somebody in a family got married, or somebody got engaged. So here it's an announcement of the death of the chief rabbi of Morocco, Rabbi Raphael Nkawa, in 1935. And you have a list down here of everybody that attended his funeral, or the notable people. Apparently over 50,000 people attended it. But if we go straight to the website, you can open, you can, yeah, so we've got here, this is all the issues they have for Le Petit Marocain, and you can search over here on the side within it. So if we put in Kawa, English, or any name that you're searching for, you get many hits. So here, this one is from 1935, so it's again probably about Rabbi Raphael Nkawa. But here, 1946, we've got somebody died, so let's put in an announcement. If we have a look at it, we open it up. And you can also find out the associated families, because usually the person publicizing the notice of death is usually the families that are related to them, and they're kind of saying this person died and we feel sorry for this family. And it will be a list of other families, so you know that they're likely related or connected to them in some way. So if we try to find on this page we're looking for, let's have a look. It should appear in yellow. Okay, well, it's let me have a look. Let's try this again. Page 2. No, it's not working. It should work. Let's go back. But basically, I've even found announcements there for Jews from Tangier, for Jews from Algeria. So it's very worth it to search. And you can actually even search the whole website, not just directly in the newspaper, any surname, and then you can filter the results by year or by language or by country. So I'd likely say filter it to French and country as Morocco and see what you come up with. So then we've got this, the archives of Algeria, which are based in France. Algeria were already keeping records on a European standard from the early 1800s, and many Jews from Morocco at different points, because of persecution and different reasons, moved over to different parts of Algeria. So again, even if you think nobody in your family ever lived in Algeria, you have to search here, because you'll be surprised how much information you'll find. So here, for example, we have the birth certificate of Jacob El Malech, and his father is listed as Salomon El Malech, 53 years old, a merchant who was born in Mogador, which is a Sawira, and now is living in Oran. And it lists his mother as Masouda Benitach. So to list a woman on a record in North Africa in the 1800s is amazing. And here at the bottom, you have his signature of the father, Shlomo El Maliach. And so it's pretty amazing. And here, if we go straight to the website, you can search and just click the image. And in Algeria, they were spelling basically the last names in a variety of ways. So whatever family you're looking for, try to search all the different varieties. For example, Pariente, try an Y at the end, an I. If it's been Susan, try with 2 S's, or the OU, which is the French way. But you will find a lot of Moroccans here, because they went back and forwards a lot. Next, I would say to use the Gibraltar censuses from 1777 to 1914 and the Montefiore Holy Land censuses, because all Jews, even Moroccan Jews, moved around a lot more than we expect or know. And for example, here we find the same person on both censuses. So in 1875, we've got Yacob El Malech from Essaouira, living in Yafo in Israel. Year of arrival 1870, and it says that his brother is Avraham El Malech. It says that he's married and he's got children, Yosef and Shalom. And in the Gibraltar census, we have him 3 years later as from Mogador, which is the same as Essaouira. We've got his age, 39 years old. And I know specifically that it's him because I've actually researched this family. They did get his surname wrong when they transcribed it. But so also, if you don't find the exact surname, you can download the actual images and have a look at them. Now what we have, this is the index when you search on the Montefiore census, but when you click on the image, you can see it. So in the actual image, we've got Avraham El Malech, and it says here that he's a son of Rabbi Yosef El Malech, and then it states that Yaakov El Malech is his brother. And over here, we've got the name of his daughter, Esther, his sons are Yosef and Shalom. So always try to look at the original census because it might give you more information than what is put on the transcription, because here we see the name of his father, which they didn't put on it. Another thing is that I believe about 400 Jews left Rabbat for the Holy Land in the 1850s. You can find them all on this census, and you can reconstruct a little bit the Rabbat community. And people even went back and forwards. Next is the Bulletin Officiel. So even before, even in the areas which were not under French control in Morocco, there was still a Bulletin Officiel published for it in French. And basically anything that official that happened in the country, whether it was like an inheritance, a marriage, a buying or selling of property, would appear here. Now, some of them you can search on the Gallica website where I showed you for the newspapers. Others you can search on Google Books, and some of them are not searchable at all. But if you put Bulletin Officiel in Google Books and you put the last name, you might get, tell you page number and the year. And if you check your local library, you'll probably be able to find them. The British Library here in London has hundreds of editions. So this one is from the Zone of Tangiers. I think it was from 1927. And here we have announcement of changing the owners on a property. So it speaks about Avraham J. Pinto and his brother Samuel J. Pinto, the J standing for the first name of their father, and their wives Preciada Labos and Esther Serfati. And they have, I believe, bought a property in Casablanca, and they want to list all of them as registered on the property. And it goes on to say where they also live in Tangiers, and it speaks about when they got married to show that they're actually linked. So these books actually are full of Jews, page after page, generally. But if you can find a reference in Google Books and then view the original, you can find a lot of things. Next, I wanted to speak about Facebook groups. So there's a fairly new group, which is Genealogy des Juifs Marocains. We have over 700 Moroccan Jews on the group. Mainly people post in French, but you can post in any language. And basically, because there's such a lack of records from Morocco, you really need to crowdsource the information. You need to create the records. So for Moroccan genealogy, you have to ask people, who their parents were, who their grandparents were, contact people. And we also have, there's various groups for Fez, for Oujda, Agadir, Tangiers, Rabbat. And if you come from somewhere where there's no group, I suggest create the group on Facebook, invite people, and get people posting and discussing about the community. Get people to post pictures of the ketubot. If you have an old ketubah at home, somebody can help you read it, and you might find generations backwards. There's also an online forum called Dafina. It's not as much in use as it used to be, but already from the 1990s, you've got Moroccan Jews posting on the forum in French, pictures discussing genealogies, and you can search the website and find out a lot. I've actually filled in a lot of genealogies just by reading old conversations from the 90s in this website. There's also many blogs which people have put up. For example, like this one by Roland Ben Zaken. He is from Rabbat, and he put up a blog about the Melach. So you have a map of the Melach, all the different streets, and he's even listed where he knew, I think between 1910 to 1920, the different people who lived in the different houses. So it's actually in French, but the page automatically translates to English, and you see in house number 1, Benatar, or this one, Shalom Ben Walid, and his wife Simi Lazri. So there's a lot of information here. So look for these blogs. You'll find genealogical information where you least expect it. Also on Jenny, so it's a free website to build family trees. Obviously, anybody who can edit various profiles, unless they're a master profile and it's locked. So some people don't like to put their family trees up on this website because it might get tampered with. But at the moment, I can tell you that we have over 70,000 profiles for Moroccan Jews, and we're trying to get more and more Moroccan Jews to join Jenny and upload their trees, and we can find connections. We also have a project for the Jewish communities of Morocco, and each community will have its own page. If you see that your community is not there, you can make a project, add people, and as you start adding the profiles to various communities, you get an idea of which families lived where, and which communities mix with other communities. Or you can write to me as well, and I can set it up for you. And I will tell you, put your tree online, because if your tree is not online, nobody's going to find you, they're not going to contact you. And the generation of people who left Morocco, we don't have much longer to ask them questions, our grandparents, to get information about where they lived, who their cousins were. So try to ask as many questions as you can and put them up online. If you want to contact me, this is my email, or you can find my business page on Facebook under Adafina.